Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
I have watched our world end 3 times. The first 2 times, it was the sky that did it. The third time, it was a man who could not even breathe our air without a mask over his soft little face. I am old now. My shell has gone gray at the joints and my underarms ache when the pressure drops. The young ones who come to the records hall, they look at me the way you look at a stone in a riverbed, something that has always been there, something that does not feel. They do not know. They were born after. They were named at birth, the way it is done now, the way it has always been done as far as they understand. They do not know that there was a time when we did not name our small ones. They do not know why that changed. I knew the man who changed it. I stood close enough to smell the strange iron of him. And before I am gone, I want to put it down properly in my own words, the way it happened and not the way the singers sing it now. Because the singers have made him into something he was not. They have made him calm. They have made him sure. They have made him into a thing that knew it was doing something great. He did not know. He was terrified the whole time. I saw his hands shake. I want you to know that. It matters that you know that. Let me start where it started. On the morning the dust came early. Our town was called Kesset Hollow, though there was very little hollow about it, and even less that I would now call a town. It was a scrape of buildings on the lip of a basin, out where the old salt seas had dried into white flats that went on past the curve of the world. We were a mining settlement. We pulled a mineral out of the deep shafts. We called it black salt, though it was not salt and it was barely black, and the off-world trade liked it well enough to keep us alive out there at the edge of nothing. I should tell you about the ashfall, because if you do not understand the ashfall, you will not understand any of it. Twice each long year the winds turn. They come down off the dead mountains in the north, and they carry the ash of the burning fields with them, not soft ash, not the gray you might imagine, but something fine and sharp and pale, like ground glass, like powdered bone. It gets into everything. It gets into the seams of your shell and it works at the soft places. It gets into your breathing slits and it scours them raw. A grown loron, hardened, full-shelled, can stand a few hours of it if they must, coughing black for a week after. But a small one cannot. A small one has soft plating. A small one breathes too fast and too shallow. The ash goes into them and it does not come out, and they drown on dry land with their mouths working. So we built deep. Every settlement on the flats had its shelter, a dug-down hall, sealed, with old air scrubbers grinding away, where we waited out the worst of the season. And every settlement had the same law, the same as it had been for longer than there were records to record it. The order of saving. You will not like it. I do not like it, not anymore. But I will tell it to you the way it was taught to me when I was small. When the ash comes and there is not time enough for all, you save in order. First the carriers, the ones holding eggs not yet laid because they hold the future twice over. Then the workers in their prime because they keep us all alive. Then the elders if there is room because they keep our memory. And last of all, if there is any room left, which there often was not, the small ones, the unnamed. We did not name our young. I need you to sit with that. We did not name them, not until they had lived through their first ashfall and their second. Until then they were smalls. They were the soft ones. They had numbers for the crèche records, but not names. And the reason, oh, we had a reason. We had a beautiful, gentle reason that let us sleep at night. The reason was that so many of them died. The ash took them, or fever took them, or they simply faded the way small ones do. And we told ourselves that it was kinder not to love a thing with a name before it had earned the right to keep one. It is easier to leave behind a number than a name. That was the whole of it, though we dressed it in soft words. It is easier to walk into the shelter and seal the door behind you and not count exactly who did not make it in, when none of the ones left outside had names. I believed this. I want to be honest. I was not some secret rebel keeping a tender heart against the cruelty of my people. I believed it the way you believe in the ground under your feet. It was simply true. The Smalls were not yet people. They were people-shaped, people in waiting, but you did not grieve a number. And then a man with no shell at all, a man so soft you could have crushed his hand in your grip, a man who would not have survived 1 hour of our ashfall unmasked. That man looked at our law and could not understand it. And because he could not understand it, he broke it. And because he broke it, I have spent the rest of my life trying to. The humans had been with us for 2 long years by then. Not many of them, a survey team, a handful of trade officials, and the work crew that kept the off-world water plant running, because human equipment had turned out to be cheaper than ours, and the company that bought our black salt had insisted on installing it. The water plant pulled moisture out of the deep aquifer and made it clean enough to drink, and it had broken down twice in its first year. And so the company had sent people to live among us and keep it running. That was how we got Eli Brandt. He was not important. I want to be clear about that because the singers have made him important from the start, have made him a chosen one, a hero waiting for his hour. He was not. He was a maintenance engineer. He fixed pumps. He was perhaps 30 of his years, which I never learned to translate properly into hours, and he had a flat, tired face and pale fur on the top of his head that he kept cut short, and he walked with a small limp on the cold mornings that he never explained. He smelled of iron and of the oil he used on the machines and of something Swedish underneath that all the humans had, that we never got used to. He spoke our trade tongue badly. He laughed at things that were not funny and missed things that were. He was, in every way I could measure, an unremarkable creature. But he came to the crèche. That was the strange thing about him, the thing the other workers noticed and made jokes about. Eli came to the crèche. He did not have to. No human had to. But on his rest days he would come down to the long, low building where the Smalls were kept, and he would sit on the floor with his soft body folded up wrong, the way humans fold, and he would let them climb on him. The Smalls loved him. This is not sentiment, I watched it. Our own caretakers were brisk with the young, as you must be when so many of them will not last the season. You keep a distance. You do not let them get inside you. But Eli let them inside him completely. He learned their numbers. He gave them sounds, not names. He was careful never to call them names. The caretakers had explained the law to him, and he did not openly defy it, not then, but he gave them sounds. Little human sounds. He called one of them Pip, because of the noise it made. He called another Tumble. He would make these sounds and the Smalls would come running, scrambling over each other on their soft new legs, and he would laugh that strange, wet human laugh. I asked him once why he did it. I was a records clerk then, young in my work, and I had been sent to the crèche to update the survival counts, which is a task exactly as cold as it sounds. I found him on the floor with 3 of them piled on his lap and one trying to climb his head. They are not yet named, I told him. I do not know why I said it. Perhaps I wanted to warn him. Perhaps I wanted to seem wise. You should not become attached. Most of them will not live to be named. He looked up at me. He had eyes that showed too much. Humans cannot hide behind their eyes the way we can. Everything moves across the front of them like weather. And for a moment something crossed his that I did not have a word for, that I would not have a word for until much later. "Yeah," he said in his bad trade tongue. "Somebody told me that already." Then he looked back down at the one on his lap, the one he called Pip, and he stroked the soft ridge of its back with one finger. "Where I'm from," he said slowly, working for the words, "we name them before they're born. We pick the name and we say it, out loud, to the belly." He patted his own stomach, awkward, trying to make me understand. "So even if it doesn't, even if something goes wrong and it never," he stopped. He tried again. "We figure it ought to have had a name. Even for a little while, even if nobody else ever says it." I did not understand him. I told him it was inefficient. I told him it caused unnecessary grief. I believed I was being kind, explaining the sense of our way to a creature too simple to have worked it out. He just nodded, the way he did when he had decided not to argue, and he kept coming to the crèche. I have thought about that small conversation more than any other conversation in my life. I thought about it for years. I think about it now. The morning the dust came early, I was in the records hall logging the season's stores. It was meant to be safe time still. The Ashfall Almanac, and we trusted the almanac. We had trusted it for generations, said we had 4 more days. 4 days to bring in the outlying crews, to move the smalls from the surface crèche down to the deep shelter, to seal the scrubbers and settle in. 4 days was comfortable. 4 days was nothing to worry about. The wind changed at mid-morning. I felt it before I understood it. There is a pressure that comes ahead of the ash, a heaviness in the joints, an itch in the breathing slits. The old ones get it worst. Our settlement keeper, Thren of the Deep Shaft, who was older than me by half again and had skin like cracked riverbed, she stood up in the middle of the store's meeting and held very still, and we all went quiet watching her, and then she said one word. Verily. I will never forget the silence after that word. We had perhaps an hour, perhaps less. The almanac was wrong, or the mountains had not read the almanac, and a wall of the pale, grinding death was coming down off the North Range, and there was perhaps 1 hour before it reached the hollow. What happened next was not panic exactly. We had drilled for this. We knew the order. The carriers were moved first, hurried down into the deep shelter, their precious unlaid eggs cradled close. The prime workers followed, shutting down the shafts as they came. The scrubbers were sealed. The doors were prepared. And the smalls were in the surface crèche, half a measure away across the open flat, where they had always been kept, because there had always been time to move them in an orderly way over the comfortable days the almanac promised. There was a transport. We had one, an old hauler, slow and stubborn, used to move the smalls and their caretakers down to the deep shelter when the season came. It could carry them all in 2 runs. 2 runs across the flat and back. With 4 days, 2 runs was nothing. With 1 hour, 2 runs was everything. I was there when they argued about it. I was in the muster yard with my record slate still in my hands, useless, forgotten, while Thren and the shelter keeper and the transport master stood in a tight knot and made the calculation that our law made for them. 1 run. There was time for 1 run if the transport went now and came straight back and the people on it did not waste a breath. 1 run could carry the caretakers and the eldest of the smalls, the ones nearly old enough to be named, the ones with the best chance of mattering. 1 run. The second run would not make it. The ash would be on the flat before the transport could cross it twice. Whoever went out on a second run would not come back, and the smalls left in the crèche for that second run. They did not finish the sentence. They did not have to. We all knew the order of saving. The unnamed came last. If there was room, there was not room, there was 1 run. I watched Thren give the order. I watched her face do nothing while she gave it, because she was old and full-shelled and she had given orders like it before in other seasons, and she had learned to let her face do nothing. Load the caretakers. Load the eldest smalls. 1 run. Seal the shelter when it returns. The rest is the season's price. The season's price. That is what we called it. The smalls who did not make it were the season's price, and we paid it every long year twice, and we told ourselves the books balanced. I was writing it down. The gods forgive me, I had my slate out and I was writing down the order as it was given because that was my work to record what was decided. 1 transport run. Caretakers and eldest cohort prioritized. Remaining surface crèche cohort, season's price. I was writing the word price when a hand came down over my slate. A soft hand. 5 soft fingers with the pale half-moons at the tips that I had always found a little obscene, a little too naked. Eli Brandt had come into the muster yard. He had heard the order. His trade tongue was bad, but it was not so bad that he had not understood the shape of what was being decided. And he stood there with his hand over my slate and his weather eyes moving fast across the knot of elders, and his soft chest going up and down too quick, and he said, "How many?" Thren turned to look at him. To her great credit, she did not dismiss him. She was a hard creature, but not a stupid one, and the humans were guests, and she answered, "It is not your concern, water keeper. Go to the deep shelter. You will be given air." "How many?" he said again, louder. His voice had a crack in it. "In the crèche, right now, how many of them get left?" The transport master answered before Thren could stop him. Perhaps he wanted to make Eli understand. Perhaps he wanted to make himself understand. After the eldest cohort and the caretakers, he said, "Perhaps 40. 40 of the soft ones. There is no room and there is no time. It is the season's price." I watched Eli's face when he heard the number, 40. I told you that humans cannot hide behind their eyes. Everything crosses the front of them like weather. What crossed his then was not the calm the singers give him now. It was not resolve. It was something closer to sickness. He looked the way a creature looks when it has eaten something rotten and feels it turning. His soft mouth opened and closed. His hands, I saw this, I was a hand's reach away, his hands started to shake. And then he asked the question that broke everything. He asked it quiet, almost to himself, in his own human tongue first, and then again in our trade tongue, as if he had to translate it for himself before he could believe he was saying it. "Pip's in there," he said. "Tumble, the little one with the bent, they're in there. Right now. They're sitting in there waiting for the transport, and the transport's not coming back for them." Nobody answered him. There was nothing to answer. He had named them, given them his human sounds, which were not names, which were against no law because they were not names, and in naming them he had done the one thing our whole order was built to prevent. He had made them not a number. He looked at me, right at me with those terrible open eyes. "You're writing it down," he said. "You're writing down that they get left." "It is the law," I told him. My voice was not steady. I want that recorded too. My voice was not steady. "It is the order of saving. The carriers, the workers, the elders, and the smalls last if there is room. There is no room, I am sorry. There is nothing, it is simply how it is. It has always been how it is." He looked at me for a long moment. The wind was rising. You could hear it now, a low grinding hiss out beyond the buildings, the first whisper of the ash coming over the flats. Everyone in the yard had begun to move toward the deep shelter, the way water moves toward a drain, drawn down to safety, and Eli Brandt stood still in the middle of it like a stone. The water moved around. And then he did something I did not understand. He took his hand off my slate. He straightened up. He stopped shaking, not because the fear had gone, I could see the fear was still all over him, but because he had set it aside the way you set aside a heavy thing you have decided to carry anyway. And he turned and started walking, not toward the deep shelter where the air was, toward the muster yard gate, toward the open flat, toward the surface crèche, half a measure away with the ash coming. The transport master shouted at him. Thren shouted at him. I think I shouted too. We told him the transport was loading for its one run, that it would not wait, that he could not cross the flat on foot before the ash came, that he was a soft thing and the ash would take him in minutes, that there was nothing one man could do for 40 smalls with no transport and no time. He stopped at the gate. He turned back, and he said the thing that the singers have right, the one thing they did not have to change. He said, "You've got a whole word for it, the season's price. You've got it all worked out so nice you don't even have to look." He pulled the breathing mask up over his soft face, the little human mask that was never made for our ash, that would buy him minutes and not hours. His voice came out muffled through it. "Where I'm from, we don't have a word for that. We never figured out how to make one." And he went out onto the flat. I did not follow him. I want that recorded too, in my own words, because the singers leave it out, and it is the truest thing I know about myself. I did not follow him. I stood in the muster yard with my slate in my hands and the word price half written on it, and I watched a soft, unshelled creature walk out alone toward 40 children we had already decided to leave to die, and I did not follow him. I told myself it was the law. I told myself it was sense. I told myself he was a fool who would die for nothing and take none of them with him. The wind grinding louder, the pale wall growing on the northern sky, the transport's engine coughing to life behind me for its one cold run. And out on the white flat, getting smaller, a single dark figure limping a little on the cold ground, walking the wrong way. I told you I did not follow him. That is true, and I will not soften it. But I am going to tell you what happened out at the crèche all the same, and you should know how I came to know it, so that you do not think I am inventing. I know it from three things. I know it from the crèche's own cold eye, the survival count recorder that runs in every crèche, a dull little machine that watches the soft ones day and night and logs which of them are breathing and which have stopped. It does not care. It is not built to care. But it sees everything, and it saw everything that day, and later I sat through every measure of what it caught. I know it from the man himself, in the few halting things he told me after, on the nights he could be made to speak of it at all. And most of all I know it from Sukin. I have to tell you about Sukin, because the singers have left her out almost entirely, and that is a theft. Sukin was a caretaker, young, barely past her own nomming, soft-tempered in a way the older caretakers had not yet trained out of her. She was meant to be on the transport. She was on the transport. They had loaded her with the eldest cohort, packed in tight, and the old hauler was already grinding away from the surface crèche on its one cold run when she looked back through the open tail of it and saw what was being left behind. 40 soft ones, in the crèche, with the doors not even properly sealed because there had been no time, and no one with them but the recorder's cold eye. Sukin jumped. She told me later she did not decide to. She said her body decided for her, that one moment she was packed in with the saved, and the next she was rolling in the white dust with the transport pulling away, and a caretaker screaming her number after her. She picked herself up and she ran back to the crèche, back toward the thing everyone else was running from, and she got inside and pulled the bad door half shut behind her, and she was there with the 40, when the soft, off-world creature came staggering in out of the rising wind. So between the cold eye and Sukin's grief, and the man's broken handful of words, I have put it together. This is the truest I can make it. The flat between the muster yard and the surface crèche was half a measure of open white nothing. You have to understand what it is to cross that on foot with the ash coming. A full-shelled laroon, hardened, low to the ground on 4 strong legs, could perhaps have done it, could have put their head down and driven across before the worst of it. Eli Brandt was none of those things. He was tall and soft and upright, balanced on 2 legs like a thing waiting to be knocked over, with a limp that slowed him on the cold ground, and a flimsy human breathing mask that was never built for our ash strapped over a face that had no plating at all. The cold eye does not watch the flat. So for that part I have only what he told me, and he told me almost nothing, because I do not think he remembered it as anything but white. He said it was like walking into a wall that kept moving back. He said the wind came first, just wind pushing at him, and then the first of the ash, fine and pale, sliding across the ground in long ribbons around his boots. He said it did not seem so bad at first, and that was the trick of it. He kept going. The wall on the northern sky kept growing, and then the leading edge of the real ashfall came over him, and he said the world simply went away. No ground, no sky, no crèche ahead of him, no muster yard behind. Just the pale grinding white, roaring, getting into the seams of his clothes, hissing against the mask. He said he lost which way he was facing. He said he got down on his hands and his knees, on all fours like one of us, he said, with something that was almost a laugh when he said it, and he crawled, because down low the ash thinned just enough that he could see the ground a hand in front of his face, and he followed the ground. He should have died on that flat. Every Lorun who has heard the story knows he should have died on that flat. A soft thing, blind, lost, crawling with a mask already clogging. The almanac that was wrong about the timing was not wrong about the ash. It takes the soft ones in minutes. What saved him was the most human thing in the whole account, and the singers cut it because it is not grand. What saved him was that he had spent 2 long years fixing the water lines that ran out to the surface crèche, and his hands knew those lines the way your hands know the path to your own sleeping mat in the dark. He found a pipe, a water line, running just under the surface of the flat, with its little raised inspection caps every 20 paces that he had cleaned 100 times. He found one cap with his blind, groping fingers, and he knew which way the line ran, and he crawled along it cap by cap counting, because counting was the only thing left that worked, all the way to the crèche. He told me that part once, just once. He said, "I didn't find them because I'm brave, I found them because I'm a plumber." And then he would not say any more. The cold eye picks him up at the crèche door. I have watched this part more times than is good for me. The image is poor, the ash fouls the lens, but you can make him out. The bad door swinging in, a shape falling through it, more than walking, going straight down to its knees on the crèche floor. Sukin rushing to drag it the rest of the way in and force the door shut against the wind. And the shape on its knees, tearing the clogged mask off its face because the mask had stopped giving air, coughing, black, soft chest heaving. And then the shape lifting its head and looking around the crèche at the 40 soft ones, and going very, very still. I have tried to imagine what he saw. Sukin told me, but Sukin was inside her own terror and her telling came in pieces. 40 smalls crowded back against the far wall. The crèche was not a shelter. Its scrubbers were small, meant for the comfortable days, not for this. They were already losing, already letting the fine ash sift in through the bad seals, and the air in the crèche was going pale. And the soft ones cannot stand the ash. I told you this. They have soft plating and they breathe too fast and the ash goes into their breathing slits and scours them raw, and a young one's raw breathing slits do not close. They bleed. Inside where you cannot reach. They drown in it slow on dry land with their little mouths working. It had already begun when he got there. The cold eye logs it without feeling. This number stopped breathing at this mark. This number at this mark. The youngest were going first. By the time Eli Brandt crawled through that door, 3 of the 40 had already stopped, and more were down on the floor with their sides pumping wrong and pale froth at their breathing slits. Sukin was doing what caretakers do. She was keeping the count. She was moving the failing ones away from the living ones. She had been trained, as I was trained, to manage the season's price. She told me she was already deciding in her head which ones could still be saved if a transport somehow came, and which ones were already the price. She was 9 years a caretaker and she knew how to do this. She hated it and she knew how to do it. And the soft off-world creature crawled across the floor to the nearest failing small, and it was Pip, Sukin said. It was the one he called Pip, down on its side with froth at its slits, and he gathered it up against his soft chest, and he did a thing none of us would have done. He tried to save a small that was already the price. Now I have to tell you about the blood, and I have to tell it carefully because the singers have made it into a miracle, and it was not a miracle. It was worse than a miracle. A miracle costs nothing. This cost everything by the spoonful, and he paid it knowing. You will remember, or you will not. So I will say it again, that the human survey team had been with us 2 long years, and that they were curious creatures, always measuring, always sampling. One of their medics in the first year had taken samples of our young and our old and our prime, the way they did, and had found a thing and written it down and thought little of it, the way you note an oddity you do not expect to need. The thing she found was this. A Laroon young one's blood does not close on its own. The agent that makes it close, the thing that hardens a wound shut, does not come into us until we are older, until near our nomming, in fact. That is part of why the ash kills the soft ones and spares the hardened. A grown Laroon scoured slits clot and close, and a small ones do not. They simply keep bleeding inside until they are gone. We had always known the soft ones died easier. We had never known precisely why. The human medic found the why, wrote it in her report, and added a curiosity at the end. That human serum, the pale part of human blood, carried a clotting agent that, in her samples in a dish, made the young Laurun blood close. She thought it interesting. She thought it might someday matter for crèche medicine. Then the survey moved on to measuring something else. Eli Brandt was not a medic. He was a maintenance engineer who fixed pumps and water lines. But he had been at the table on the night the medic talked about her findings, and he had heard her say it, the way you half hear a thing that has nothing to do with you, and somewhere in him it had stuck. Human blood makes the little one's blood close. I do not know the moment he remembered it. Sukin did not see his face clearly in the failing light. But I know what he did, because the cold eye saw it, and because Sukin saw it, and because his own arms carried the proof of it for the rest of his life. He had no equipment, no needles, no tubes, none of the careful tools their medics used. He had a multi-tool from his belt, the kind a maintenance man carries, with a blade for cutting line and stripping wire. He had his own 2 soft arms, and he had a small dyeing in them whose raw breathing slits would not close. He opened his own arm. Sukin said he did it without hesitating, and that the not hesitating was the most frightening part, more frightening than the ash. He laid his forearm open with the multi-tool, a long shallow cut, and the human blood came red, shockingly red. You have to remember we had rarely seen it, our own runs darker, and he pressed the welling of it directly to the small one's scoured slits, working it in with his fingers, holding it there, his soft mouth moving, saying the human sounds. Pip. Come on. Pip. And the bleeding inside the small one slowed, and then it closed. It worked. The cold eye logs it, this number marked failing, marked stabilizing. The first small lived, Pip lived. And there were 36 more of them, and most of them were going to fail before the ash passed, and he had 1 body and 1 arm's worth of blood, and he understood the arithmetic of it the way Sukin had understood the arithmetic of the season's price, except that his arithmetic ran the other way. Every small he saved cost him by the spoonful, cost him in the one currency he could not refill in time. He went to the next one. I want to slow down here, because the singers rush this part and they should not. He did it 30 more times. Not all at once. He was clever about it, or as clever as a terrified bleeding creature can be. He saw quickly that he could not open himself 30 times, that a body has only so much. So he and Sukin worked out a thing between them, the soft off-world man and the young caretaker, in the pale dark with the scrubbers failing and the ash sifting down. He would give his blood, and Sukin, who knew the soft ones, who had 9 years of handling them, Sukin would carry it. She tore strips from her own caretaker's wrap. He would bleed onto a strip, soak it, and she would run it to a failing small and work it into the raw slits the way she had seen him do, while he pressed his arms shut and breathed and made himself ready to give again. They had a system, a soft off-world plumber and a young Laurun caretaker who had jumped off a transport, working a system in the dark to keep 40 unnamed children breathing. He gave, she carried, he gave, she carried. The cold eye logs it in its dull way, number after number sliding from failing back toward living. But the cold eye also logs the other thing, the thing happening to the one warm body in the room that was not a Laurun. Because the ash was in the crèche now, the scrubbers had lost, the air had gone pale and thick, and Eli Brandt had torn off his clogged mask at the door and never put it back on because there was no time and his hands were always full. So he was breathing it. The same ash that scoured the soft one's slits was scouring his, and a human's lungs are softer than any of ours, soft like a small one's softer. He was coughing black between the giving. He was bleeding from his opened arm and bleeding inside from the ash and going gray-pale and cold. And the cold eye, which measures warmth among its other dull duties, logs his warmth dropping, mark by mark, even as the small's warmth steadied. Sukin said that near the end he could not stand, that he sat against the wall with the worst-off smalls gathered into his lap, the way they used to climb him on his rest days, except now they were too weak to climb and he was too weak to lift them. So they were just heaped together, the soft off-world creature and the soft unnamed ones, breathing the same bad air, sharing the same warmth that was running out of him. She said he kept making the sounds, the little human sounds, pip, tumble, the ones he had named sounds for, and then he ran out of sounds for the ones he had never gotten to, so he started making new ones, right there, dying, giving each small a sound as he pressed Sukin's blood-soaked strips to it, as if it mattered, as if a thing that was about to be the season's price ought to at least have a sound said over it first. She said, and this is the part I cannot get out of me, this is the part that lives behind my eyes. She said that at one point, when she was running a strip to a small in the corner and she did not think he could see her, he caught her wrist with his cold, soft hand. And he said to her, in his broken trade tongue, very quiet, "Tell them they had names. Whatever happens, tell them they all had names." And then he gave her the strip back, soaked again, and sent her on to the next one. The ashfall lasted the rest of that day and into the dark. That is how it is. It comes fast and it does not hurry to leave. In the deep shelter half a measure away, behind the good sealed doors and the working scrubbers, we waited it out. The carriers with their unlaid eggs, the prime workers, the elders, Thren of the deep shaft who had given the order, the eldest cohort and the caretakers who had made the one transport run, and me with my slate with the word price half written on it and never finished, because I never did finish that line. I could not. I sat in the good air with the word unfinished, and I thought about the dark shape crawling the wrong way across the white, and I told myself, over and over, the things our law gives us to tell ourselves. The order of saving. The season's price. It has always been how it is. The words did not work anymore. He had broken them. He had put his soft hand over my slate and asked how many, and from that moment the words had a crack in them, and through the crack I could hear, very faint, all the way across the flat and through the storm, the thing our law had been built so carefully to keep us from hearing. That a number is a name, nobody has said yet. When the wind finally dropped in the dead middle of the night, Thren ordered the transport out. Not for a rescue. Let me be honest even now. She ordered it out to recover the recorder and the bodies and to log the season's price, because that is what the law required, an accounting. No one in that shelter believed there was anything living in the surface crèche. A crèche with failed scrubbers, a full ashfall, 40 soft ones, one young caretaker who had thrown her life away, and one soft off-world fool who had crawled out to die with them. The transport went out to count the dead. I went with it. That much I did. It was the first thing I did right, and it was almost the last thing, and it was far too late, but I went. We crossed the flat in the dark with the ash settling pale around the transport's lamps. No one spoke. The transport master found the crèche by its lights, still burning, and we saw that the bad door was shut, jammed shut from inside, and that was the first wrong thing because the dead do not jam doors. It took 3 prime workers to force it. And the lamp swung in, and the cold settled air stirred, and there on the floor of the failed crèche, in the pale ankle-deep drift of ash that had sifted in through every bad seam, we found them. 40 soft ones, alive, pale, weak, scoured, but alive, every single one of them that had still been breathing when he came through the door, and most of the 3 that hadn't, because he had gotten to them in time after all. Alive and heaped together for warmth around 2 shapes in the center of the floor. A young caretaker, Sukin, on her knees, her wrap torn to nothing, her arms dark to the elbow with dried off-world red, looking up into the lamps with an expression I have no word for in any tongue. And the soft off-world creature, Eli Brandt, on his back in the ash, his arm laid open and crusted black-red from wrist to elbow, his soft chest barely moving, gray as the ash he lay in, cold as the floor, with the smallest of the soft ones with Pip tucked into the curve of his cold neck, breathing, alive, alive, alive. He was not dead. I want you to have that, the way I did not have it in that first terrible moment in the lamplight when I was sure that he was. He was not dead. But he was very close. And the part of this I most need you to understand, The part the singers must never be allowed to take from him is this. He had no idea, lying there, whether it had worked. He had given everything by the spoonful in the dark with the cold eye the only witness, and he had passed out of himself somewhere in the last of it, and he did not know, could not know, whether the 40 had lived or whether he had simply bled himself white for nothing in a failed crèche at the edge of nothing. He did not do it because he knew it would work. He did it because he could not do the other thing. He could not walk into the good air and seal the door and let how many become a word in my records and never have to look. That was the man, not the calm one in the songs, a terrified plumber, gray in the ash, who could not make himself stop counting once he had started. The lamps in the wrecked crèche, the 40 soft ones breathing, Sukin's red arms, and Thren of the deep shaft, who had given the order of saving, standing in the forced doorway behind me, old, hard, full-shelled, the keeper of the law that said these 40 were the season's price, standing there, and looking at what one soft creature had refused to let that law be true. I turned and saw her face. And for the first time in my life, I saw a full-shelled elder's face do something it was never trained to do. I will tell you what Thren's face did in the forced doorway of the wrecked crèche, with the lamps swinging and the 40 soft ones breathing, and the gray off-world creature laid open on the floor. It crumpled. That is the only word I have. A full-shelled elder's face is not built to crumple. It is trained from the first nomming to do nothing, to hold, to keep the order, because an elder who shows what they feel cannot give the orders that must be given. Thren had given the worst order our law allows. She had stood in the muster yard and said one run and let her face do nothing, because she had done it before in other seasons and she had learned how. She was the keeper of the order of saving. She was the law, standing on 4 hard old legs. And the law looked at 40 children it had condemned, alive, heaped for warmth around the body of the stranger who had refused the condemnation. And the law's face crumpled like a young one's, and the law made a sound I had never heard an elder make. She did not say anything, not then. She crossed the crèche floor, pushing past me, past the prime workers, and she got down, low, old joints protesting beside the gray shape of Eli Brandt. And she put one hard claw very gently against his soft, cold chest and felt it rise, and fall, and rise. Then she stood and she turned to the transport master, and her voice had the crack in it that I knew, the crack he had put in all of us, and she said, "He breathes. Get him to the deep shelter. Get the off-world medics. Now, run." And then when the master hesitated because the soft ones, the 40, were not loaded, and the law said the order of saving, and he did not know if the order still held, Thren said the second thing. The thing that I wrote down that night, and that I have never let the singers change, because it is the hinge the whole world turned on. She said, "All of them, everyone, we are taking all of them home." He lived. I will not pretend it was simple or quick. The off-world medics worked on him for a long time in the deep shelter that night, with their soft, urgent voices and their machines, and there was a stretch near dawn where they went very quiet, and Sukin and I sat against the wall outside and did not look at each other. But he lived. He had given more of himself than a body should be able to give and live, and the ash had been in his soft lungs, and the medics said words I did not understand about what it had done in there. But he lived. He did not come out of it whole. I want that in the account because the singers give him back his strength at the end like a gift the gods owed him, and the gods owed him nothing and gave him less. His lungs were never right again. He coughed in the cold for the rest of his time among us, a deep wet cough that I learned the sound of and listened for. The limp he had come with, the one he never explained, got worse. The medics said the long cold crawl across the flat had done something to it. His arm carried the scar from wrist to elbow, a pale raised line he never hid and never spoke of. He was a diminished thing after, smaller, slower. He had spent himself and he did not get the spending back. I asked him once when he could speak again, whether he would do it the same. I think I wanted him to say no. I think I wanted him to tell me it had been a madness, a thing he regretted, so that I could keep believing my law made sense and he had simply been a fool the law had not accounted for. He thought about it a long time. He was bad at our tongue and worse at it now with his damaged chest, so he took his time. And then he said, "I keep thinking about your word, the price." He had to stop and breathe. "You pay it twice a year. You've been paying it so long you stopped feeling it. And the thing about a price, the thing you all forgot, breath, a price is something you choose. You can always choose not to pay it." He looked at his own scarred arm. "I just didn't want to be somebody who chose it." I had no answer. I have had no answer for the rest of my life. Now I have to tell you how the world changed, because the title the singers give this, that he changed a whole civilization, is the one grand claim they make that happens to be true. But they tell it as a thing he did, a deed, a triumph, and it was not. He did not change anything. He bled in a crèche at the edge of nothing and nearly died of it. The changing was ours. We had to do that part, and we very nearly did not. It was the cold eye that did it, the recorder. You will remember it had watched the whole thing, dull and uncaring, logging the giving and the carrying and the warmth running out of him, and the 40 numbers sliding back from failing toward living. That recording existed. And we are a people who record everything, who keep everything, who send our logs up the chain from settlement to the great archives in the deep cities, because we believe that what is written is what is true. Thren could have buried it. I have thought about this often. She was the keeper of the law, and the recording was the law's crime laid bare, an account of an outsider valuing our children more than the order of saving did. She could have logged it as the season's price and let the cold eyes witness rot in a drawer. No one would have known. No one would have asked. She sent it up the chain instead. All of it, unedited, the order she gave in the muster yard, the soft creature crawling the wrong way across the flat, the giving and the carrying in the failing dark, the 40 alive in the lamplight. She attached it to the season's accounting and she sent it to the deep cities, and where the count had always read season's price with a number after it, this one read a different thing. She had me write it. I was the records clerk. It was my work. She stood over me and she told me what to put, and I put it, and my own claws shook the way his soft hands had shaken in the muster yard, because I understood what she was doing. The count read, surface crèche full cohort 40, saved 40, price, none. Paid by the off-world waterkeeper Eli Brandt in his own blood freely. Price, none. In a record that had read season's price twice a year for longer than there were records to count. And then Thren made me write the last line, and it was her own, and it is the thing that traveled. It went up the chain and through the archives and into the deep cities and out to every settlement on the flats, and it was the thing that broke us open. She said, "Let it be asked in every hall why a stranger had to teach us the worth of our own young." You cannot decree a people into changing. We did not change because the deep cities sent down a new law, though in time they did. We changed because that recording went everywhere, and everywhere it went, it asked the question Thren had written, and the question could not be unasked. Why did a stranger have to teach us the worth of our own young? In the halls of the deep cities they argued it for a long year and more. There were those who said the order of saving was wise, was old, was the only thing that had carried us through the ashfalls of all our history, and that one soft off-world creature's madness did not unmake the arithmetic of survival. And the arithmetic was on their side. That was the terrible part. The order of saving was efficient. It had kept us alive. Eli Brandt had not solved the arithmetic. He had simply refused it, and you cannot run a civilization on the refusal of one diminished plumber. But the recording kept being watched, and there is a thing that happens when you watch a stranger value what you have taught yourself not to value. You cannot keep not valuing it. The not valuing was always a thing we did on purpose, a callus we grew so the season's price would not cut us. And he had shown us by bleeding that the callus was a choice, that a price is something you choose. You can always choose not to pay it. The first change was the small one, and it was the one that mattered most. It was not a change to the order of saving that came later and slower, and is still argued in some hard old halls even now. The first change was the naming. We began to name our young at birth. It started in our own settlement in Kesset Hollow, the season after. Sukin did it first. Sukin, who had jumped off the transport, who had carried his blood to the failing in torn strips of her own wrap. She went to the crèche on the day the new cohort was logged, and where the records called for a number she gave a name instead, out loud, the way he had said to. Tell them they all had names. She named the soft ones at birth, before their first ashfall, before they had earned anything, while they were still nothing but soft and likely to die. The caretakers were horrified. I understand why. To name a thing before it has survived is to make its death a grief instead of an accounting, and we had spent our whole history learning not to grieve the season's price. Sukin was making us feel it again. That was the whole of what she was doing. She was tearing off the callus on purpose, the way he had. And it spread the way the recording had spread. Settlement to settlement. A caretaker here, a crèche there, beginning to say a name where the law said say a number. Within a generation it was simply how it was done. Within two, it was how it had always been done as far as anyone young remembered. That is why the young ones who come to my records hall do not know. They were named at birth, every one of them, the way their parents were named at birth. They have never heard the word smalls used the old way. They do not know there was ever an order of saving that put their kind last. They have grown up grieved for from the first breath, loved with a name before they earned one, and they think it is the natural shape of the world. It is not. It was made. It was made by a terrified off-world plumber who bled himself gray in a failed crèche, and by an old hard elder who chose not to bury the witness, and by a young caretaker who jumped off a transport and then said a name out loud where the law said a number. It was made, and I helped make it in the end in the one small way that was left to me. I went back to my records, the old ones the seasons before, and where I had written season's price with a number after it, season after season, year after year, all those numbers, all those soft ones left in surface crèches and not counted as anything that could be grieved. I did a thing that was against every rule of my work, and Thren let me do it, and the deep cities, when they heard, did not stop me. I could not give them names. I did not know their names, they had never had any, that was the whole crime of it, so I could not give them names, but I struck out the word price. Every time it appeared in every season's accounting going back as far as our records ran, I struck it out. And beside it I wrote the only true thing I had, not a price, a loss, 40 here, 31 here, 55 here, each one a name we never said. It took me the rest of my working life. I am not finished even now. There are a great many seasons. There were a great many soft ones. But I do not write the word price anymore. He took it from me in the muster yard with his soft hand over my slate, and I have never gotten it back, and I do not want it back. Eli Brandt left us in the end. His lungs would not mend in our air, and the company that had sent him to fix our water lines had no use for a maintenance man who could no longer climb down into a shaft, and so they rotated him off, the way they rotated everything, up to a station with cleaner air, and then onward to wherever the soft ones go when their work is done. There was no ceremony. The singers give him a great farewell, the whole settlement gathered, the named young ones lined up to honor him. There was nothing of the kind. We were not yet the people who would have known to do that. We were only just beginning to become them. What there was this. On the morning the transport took him to the off-world field, Sukin brought the cohort. Not lined up, not honoring, they were too young for that, they were soft ones, they tumbled and scattered the way soft ones do. But she brought them, and she had named them every one, and as the transport idled she told him the names. All 40. She said each name out loud and pointed to the small it belonged to, so that he would know before he went that the 40 had names now, that he had not bled gray for 40 numbers, that they were 40 names, and the names would be said for the rest of their lives. I stood close enough to smell the iron of him one last time, under the medical smell they had wrapped him in. When she got to the smallest, the one he had tucked into the curve of his cold neck on the crèche floor, the one he had called Pip. Sukin said the name she had given it, and it was his name. She had named the smallest of them after him in our tongue, shaped to our sounds, but his name, so that there would be an Eli among us after the off-world one was gone. He did not say anything. He could not, I think. His ruined chest worked, and his weather eyes did the thing they did, everything crossing the front of them where he could not hide it. And he reached down with his scarred arm, the pale line from wrist to elbow that he never hid, and he let the small one, the small Eli, climb onto it one more time, the way they used to climb him on his rest days before any of this. And he made the sound, the little human sound, Pip. And then he said, very quiet, the name Sukin had given it, our name, his name. And he set it down gently in the white dust among the others. Then he got onto the transport, a diminished gray soft thing, coughing in our cold, and it carried him up to the field and away, and I never saw him again. I have watched our world end 3 times. The first 2 times it was the sky, the pale grinding death off the dead mountains, the ash that scours the soft ones raw, the season we had paid in numbers for longer than memory. The 3rd time it was a man who could not breathe our air without a mask. He did not end our world the way the songs say, with a great deed, sure of himself calm. He ended it the way a small wound ends a body slowly, from the inside, through a crack he made and could not close. He put his soft hand over my slate and he asked how many, and the asking got into the seam of us and worked at the soft place, and the world we had built so carefully. The world where a child could be a number, where a loss could be a price, where you could seal the good door and not have to look, that world bled out quietly over a generation and did not come back. The young ones in my records hall do not know him. They are named at birth, grieved for from the first breath, and they think it is the natural shape of the world. Let them think it. That is the whole of what he wanted, not to be remembered, but for there to be no more numbers left out in the crèches when the door was sealed. But I knew him. I smelled the iron of him. I saw his hands shake in the muster yard, and I did not follow him, and I have spent my life striking out a single word from old records because of it. So before I am gone, I have put it down properly, in my own words, the true way and not the singer's way. He was not brave the way they say. He was terrified the whole time, and his hands shook, and he was only a plumber, and that is exactly why it matters. Because if a frightened soft creature with shaking hands and a bad limp could refuse the price, could crawl the wrong way across the white and open his own arm 40 times in the dark, not knowing if it would work, just because he could not be someone who chose to look away, then so could we. We just needed a stranger to bleed in front of us before we believed it. And the worst of us and the best of us is that we did.